As in any programming language, the first thing that you learn are variables. So we are going to start by learning variables right here. Don't worry about all of this structure that you see right here. Everything will make sense by the end of this first section because I'm going to go step by step. I don't want to overwhelm you with all of this information, what is public, what is class, so on and so forth. We are going to take a look at all of this, but one section at a time or one problem at a time. Here we have my script that we have created in our previous video. If you don't know how to create a script, you're going to go here in your Unity editor, you're going to right click, go on create, and then C# script. When you select C# script, you are going to see this right here and you can name it whatever you want. I named this one my script. And then you can hit enter and simply then double click it and MonoDevelop will open it. MonoDevelop is this, what you see right here. This is a development environment that comes with Unity. Here we are going to write our scripts that we are going to attach on our game objects and create our game with that. So I mentioned that we are going to start by learning variables. The first variable that we are going to learn is a float. But before we even learn that variable, we need to declare it. So we are going to type here float, which is the type of that variable. When we declare variables in any programming language, first we type the name of that variable. So here we have float, and then we name this variable. So for example, this is going to be the speed of our player. So here I'm going to type speed. This is the name of the variable. And then we need to assign a value to this float variable. In order to do that, we type equals, and now we add a value because a float is a decimal point number. So I can say, for example, 2.3, and we end a statement, which is very important in any programming language, that we add a semicolon at the end. This will end the statement, tell our development environment or the compiler that this is the end or the end of this statement right here. Meaning we have declared a variable that's type of float. The name of that variable is speed and it is equal to 2.3. Now, one specific thing that we have for a float variable is that if I go back now in my Unity editor, we are going to see here in the console tab. If you don't have the console, you can go under window and here you can search for the console, which is right here. And then you can reposition this tab. If it's like this, for example, right here, you can simply drag and drop it and position it wherever you want. Going or moving forward, here in our console, we see that we need to add suffix f to create a literal of this type. What this means? Well, I said our float is a little bit specific. If we want to declare a float, we also need to type f at the end. And now if I go back, this problem that we had here will go away. This warning right here is just telling us that we have declared this variable speed on top of the script right here, but we are not using it anywhere else. So don't worry about that. That is not important. But what is important that the red warning went away. If we have, a red warning, we cannot run our project. That is a problem that we need to fix before we run our project. If we had this yellow warning, we can still run our project. Going back to our float variable, we need to add f at the end, denoting or indicating that this is a float. Why is that? As I already mentioned, float is a decimal point number, so we see here 2.3. We also have one more variable, which is a type of double. So we type here double like this, and we can name it. So for example, let's say I'm going to name it power, and it's equal to 4.2 like this. And this is also a decimal point number. But the difference between the two when we want to declare them is that we add f at the end and we are telling our MonoDevelop this right here is a float. It's not a double, it's a float. For a double, we don't need to put that f at the end. So 4.2 and MonoDevelop automatically knows that this variable right here is a double and it's not a float. Again, going briefly through our variables. First, we type the type of the variable. In our case, this is a float and this is a double. Next, we name these variables. The name is important because now in this start function, which we will explain a little bit later what it is, if we want to reference this variable, we are going to simply type here speed and we are going to reference that variable. Our speed is now 2.3. If we want to set it, for example, at 5, we are going to type speed is equal to 5.1 f, and now in our start variable, or excuse me, in our start function, we are changing the speed variable from 2.3 to 5.1. So now this speed variable has a value of 5.1 and not 2.3. Don't worry, we are going to see an example of all of this, what I'm talking about, when we start creating our games. This is just a brief introduction to variables and what we are going to use in our project. So don't worry about that. Now you might be wondering, the float is a decimal point number. A double is also a decimal point number. So what is the difference between the two? Well, a double is a little bit precise or more precise than a float. So for example, a double is precise up to this number right here, and float is precise up to this number right here. Of course, this is just a rough guess from my side. I'm not sure which number is a double precise to or a float, but this is just to paint the picture. So let's say, for example, double is precise up to this number. So up to this decimal point numbers, it will be precise, and float will be precise up to these decimal point numbers. Now in game development and in Unity in general, we are going to use float more than double. I'm not sure why that is, but double is a little bit more precise than a float, and I'm just going to add f here at the end for our float. So these are two variables that are decimal point numbers, our float and our double. We have another variable that's a whole number and it's called an integer. And we declare it like this. So I type here int and then we named it. So let's say this is health and it's equal to, let's say, 23. Our integer is a whole number, and I'm going to separate all of these variables by clicking enter between them. And as I said, an integer is a whole number. What that means? It means that when we type here 23.3, for example, and save it, every time we type something here in a script, we need to save it. And a shortcut for that is holding command and pressing S. So hold command and press S. On Mac, on Windows, hold control and press S. Because every time if we want a change to reflect in our script, we need to save it and then go in Unity Editor and see that change. Going back to our integer variable, if I type here 23.3 and save that, of course, and go back in my Unity Editor, we see here that constant value 23.3 cannot be converted to an integer. Why is that? Well, I already mentioned our integer is a whole number, so it cannot have decimal point numbers after it. Now that I put it back at 23, and if I go back here, this problem will go away. That is because I already mentioned our integer is a whole number. So there is not much to it except that. If you want a decimal point number, you can use a float or a double, but mostly we are going to use floats. And if you want a whole number, you are going to use an integer. And we declare it by typing int, which is short for integer. And we declare it the same way as we did with our float. So first we type the type of the variable, which is an integer, or int. Next we name it, which is health, and equal to assign a value, and it's equal to 23. The next variable that we have is called a string. So we type here string like this, and we name it, of course. So let's say this is the name, and it's equal to, and a string is a character variable, so to say. we type these quotation marks. So open and close these quotation marks, and what we type between them, so what we type here is the value of this string name variable. So our string is a character or a sequence of characters. We can use it, for example, for the player's name. So here we can type warrior, or we can type knight, so on and so forth. This is going to be the name of our player. So the string is a character sequence variable, and we declare it by typing string, and then we give it a name. So it can be anything what you type here, the same as for these here. The name is up to you, and you're going to give names that are meaningful, like speed, power, so on and so forth. If you want to use this variable as a speed to push the player, or his movement is going to be pushed by this speed, then you're going to name it speed so that you can reference this variable later on. So when you take a look at your script, oh, okay, this is the speed of my player. You can type also player speed or enemy speed, so on and so forth. So when you look at that variable, you're going to say, oh, this is the speed of my player. So you're going to give meaningful names to your variables, which is up to you. Again, in order to declare a string, here we are going to type string, then name it, and it's equal to, and for a string, which is very important, we need to open these quotation marks. So between these quotation marks, what we type, this is going to be the value of our string variable. So here we have type knight, we can type anything that we want. So anything that we want. And now this right here is the value that our string name variable has. The last variable before we wrap this up that we are going to get to know is called a Boolean. So we type bool, which is short for Boolean. In other programming languages, you're going to type Boolean, that is in Java, for example, but in C#, simply type bool, so B-O-O-L. And here I'm going to type is on, for example, which is the name of the variable. And our Boolean only has two values, It can either be true or it can be false. We are going to use Booleans in conditional statements. For example, if we want to, give our player some bonus, we are going to test if the speed of the player is greater than 2 or if it's less than 2. That will return true or false. It will return a Boolean variable or a Boolean value. So if we type if speed is greater than 2, if the speed is actually greater than 2, it will return true. If it's not greater than 2, it will return false. And here is on is the name of our Boolean. You can name it however you like. I just typed this because this is the first thing that came on top of my head. But in our game, or when we create a project, you are going to name your Boolean variables however you want with, of course, meaningful names. And as I said, it can only have two values. It can be false or true. The Boolean has no more values than this. So either true or false. The last thing that I want to introduce before we wrap this video up are comments. And we use comments to document our code. How to document our code? You see these lines here that we have. So from 1 up to 26. They indicate how many lines of code we have typed. So now we have 26 lines of code. But what if we create our game and we have 1,000 lines of code, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 10,000 lines of code? If we create a game, for example, and it has 10 scripts and every single script has 500 lines of code, and we publish that game and our game is going well, but we think of some updates that we want to add to our game, and we go back and we have no idea what is going on in our code because it's impossible to remember, especially after 1 or 2 or 3 months, what you wrote in your script. Because of that, we use comments to document our code. And we do that if you want to write a comment, and here we have 2 comments. So here it says, use this for initialization, referring to the start function. And don't panic, don't worry. We are going to take a look at the start function and see what it actually means. So don't worry about that. And for our update function, it says update is called once per frame. In order to create a comment, we type these backslashes or 2 backslashes. So we need to type 2 and not 1. And now we can type anything that we want. So anything that we want. And this right here will not be compiled by the compiler, nor will our monodevelop give us any errors because of this. And of course, you're going to give meaningful comments. So here we have declared the speed variable, and we can type here, this is the player's speed, like this. And it refers to the speed variable, and it will inform us when we go back to this code after 1 month or 2 months. It will tell us, okay, this is the speed of our variable, or excuse me, the speed of our player or the enemy or so on or so forth. And for the power, you can type this is the power of the player, so on and so forth. Give meaningful comments so that you can remember what your code is all about. This right here, these 2 backslashes, is only used for a single line comment. So we can type here what we want, so on and so forth, if it's on a single line. If we type enter here and type like this, now this right here is not a comment and it will give us an error. If you write or want to write multiple line comments, you're going to type a backslash and then asterisk like this, and then you are going to close that with an asterisk and a backslash. So like this. So backslash, asterisk, asterisk, and backslash. Everything what you type between. So anything that we type in between is a comment, including when we hit enter and continue to type. So and continue. So continue. Let me just, it's not important to type. I misspelled this right here. So continue like this and continue to type. This is going to be a comment. So anything, and if I give another enter, so another enter, so on and so forth, all of this now is considered a comment. And as I said, this one right here is for a single line comment, and this one right here is for the multiple line comment. So double backslash is for single lines, backslash asterisk, and asterisk backslash is for multiple lines. So here I'm going to simply type this is for multiple lines of comment. And this one is for single line comments. And again, I'm repeating, you can use these comments to document your code along when you follow along in the course. You can type for every variable, this variable is for this function is for this, so on and so forth, so that you can remember easily. But my advice, personal advice, is when you create your own projects, comment everything out so that when you come back to that code a month or 2 months or 3 months later, you will remember what you write or what you wrote, because you're going to read the comments and you're going to remember, oh, okay, this variable is the speed of the player, this variable is the speed of our enemies, so on and so forth. If you don't comment, you're going to get lost in your own code and you need to go through each script line by line to remember what you wrote. And as a brief summary, what we did in this lecture, we have learned about variables. When we declare variables, we first type the type of that variable. In this case, this is a float. Then we name it. This is the name which is based on us. We can name it however we want, but we are going to give meaningful names. And then we type equals to assign a value to that variable. And for a float, because it's a decimal point number, we type 2.2, and we need to add f to say to monodevelop that this is a float, because we also have a double that is also a decimal point number. And the difference between the two is in the precision again. A double is precise up to this number and a float is precise up to this number. This is, of course, again, I'm repeating, a rough guess from me, but this is just to paint the picture. We also have an integer which is a whole number and it cannot contain any decimal point numbers. We have a string which is a sequence of characters and we can type anything that we want, but it needs to be between these quotation marks. And also we need to end every statement with a semicolon. So this right here at the end needs to be typed after every variable declaration or function call. Don't worry about this function call. We are going to see that later on, so don't worry. And the last variable that we have is a Boolean, and it can have a true or false value. Of course, we have more variables, but these are the most common variables that we are going to use in Unity game development.